So it's a little late, but Gaijin finally did it. They gave us the FA-18. Some might say it's too late, and I've heard words like dead on arrival being thrown around, and while I can kinda see where people are coming from with that opinion, I think that might be taking it a little bit too far. I'll be honest guys, this was an aircraft that I really struggled to get the hang of for a while, and it doesn't really fly like any other aircraft I used in this game before, but I have managed to figure out a strategy that gets me consistently decent games in ARB. To be clear, this video is going to cover the Sparrow armed versions of this aircraft, the Tech Tree A and the Premium C Early, since this armament is going to heavily affect your playstyle. The AMRAAM versions will be getting their own video in the near future. So if you just purchased or unlocked this thing and have been getting your ass kicked, stick around and I'll explain my entire strategy for using this vehicle in detail.
Just do it!
Just to quickly explain the differences between the A and the C Early in case you're unfamiliar, these are mostly the same aircraft as they share the same flight model. However, the C sits one notch higher in BR, but in return gets access to a slightly improved version of the Sparrow and two more of them. This is the AIM-7P, which at the time of this recording is identical in terms of flight performance to the F and the M versions, but it gets data link, which in short basically just means that the plane and the missile talk to each other, so it's a bit more resistant to notching and reacquires targets a bit better. Honestly, the A version is probably the better of the two just due to it getting a better matchmaker, but I'll be playing the C version in this gameplay since I figured if I could get good with the one that has the worst matchmaker, then that'll probably mean my advice will be better in the end. So the Sparrow-equipped Hornets have a few problems. The first is with your missiles. Except in down tiers, nearly everything you fight is going to be as good or better than you at BVR, and additionally, Sparrows don't accelerate very fast, so you can't really overcome this by closing the distance either. Also, at the time of this recording, the Hornet pulls a crazy amount of AOA, which is useful in dogfights, but means that you'll bleed your energy out very fast while turning if you're not careful. I kinda suspect they'll end up toning this down a bit in the future, but since you have the keybind to disable the AOA limiter anyways, you should still be able to pull crazy hard if you need to, even if they do eventually make the pull a little bit less extreme by default. Additionally, the Hornet is not the fastest aircraft compared to many of its competitors, which is going to affect both the speed and range of your missiles, as well as how well you're able to disengage from a fight should the need arise. So basically, you have a very maneuverable but not super fast aircraft, which doesn't have particularly good dogfighting weapons, which also isn't particularly good at BVR either. So what exactly is the best way to deal with this? Well, let me tell you first off that hugging the deck is a terrible idea, since your Sparrows will have sub 10 kilometer effective range at that altitude, and even if you stay right at multipath altitude, you're going to have so many people launching on you that one of them is going to eventually hit regardless. Space climbing is also out of the question, since you're just going to make yourself an obvious target for Phoenixes, AMRAAMs, and R-27ERs, and you won't have the kit nor the thrust to be able to deal with a launching enemy aircraft in response. So because of that, the first thing I tried was playing this thing like I would the F4S, flying at around 3,000 meters, being very cautious, and circling around the edge of the bases, picking off targets of opportunity. The problem with that is, while the F4S at its BR can usually outrange people on the deck from that altitude, at this BR, R-27ERs and Fox 3s launched from the deck are still going to be able to win against your Sparrows, even if you have an altitude advantage. Instead, what I found worked best the majority of the time was to climb at 10 degrees right off the airfield, level out between 4,500 and 5,000 meters, and then swing out wide around the left side of the map while picking up speed. You can usually get up to around Mach 1.2 doing this. Once you reach the enemy bases, you can then turn back and start engaging targets of opportunity. There are a few reasons why I find this strategy to be optimal. First, this will get you high and fast enough to give your Sparrows enough of a boost in range that you'll be competitive in BVR even in an up tier while staying at below contrail height, which will make you harder to spot and significantly decrease the chance of you being targeted. The second reason is that early game, you're still going to need to defeat Phoenix and R-27 launches quite regularly, so having this kind of speed and altitude to play around with will make it much easier to dodge kinematically without having to completely bleed yourself off of energy. There's also the fact that by firing radar missiles down on top of people, it can sort of bypass the effect of multipathing, since even if it's aiming for the ghost target that it sees reflected off the ground, by coming at it from above, it will often still catch the actual aircraft within the trigger radius of its proximity fuse. Lastly, because this version of the Hornet uses semi-active radar missiles, you do not want to be engaging large groups of enemies all at once with this aircraft, at least in most cases. There's one exception, which I'll explain in a minute. Most enemies you encounter while flying this route will be either flying along the deck or at very high altitude, and while supersonic at 5,000 meters, your Sparrows will have enough range to engage either one of them, while at the same time, they are not going to be able to easily notice you. For maximum kill potential, I would also recommend holding your fire until you get within about 20 kilometers of high-flying targets, or 12 or so kilometers for low-flying targets, depending on your speed. Once you circle back towards the enemy bases, there are 3 typical scenarios you'll encounter. Either your entire team will be dead already and there will be nothing you can do, the enemy team will have gotten distracted by one of your teammates trying to RTB and will be back behind your team's bases, or there will be one giant furball in the middle of the map. Whatever the case, you should first prioritize killing any high-flying enemies you see remaining. Enemies on the deck will typically be tunnel visioning onto your low-flying teammates by this point, so save them for last. There are 2 primary ways you can go about picking off the low-flying targets. The first is, obviously, your Sparrows. Basically just do what you did during the opening stages of the match and try to pick off lone targets as you see them. Be aware, though, that despite this thing having quite a good radar that's able to keep all aspect lock very well, the effective range of these Sparrows against enemies flying perpendicular to you is not very great, so you'll want to prioritize targets flying directly at you at very high speed. Another quick side note, if you are forced to engage large groups of enemies head-on all at once, I'd recommend engaging a target at the very edge of the group and turning away, which will make it easier to notch launches from the rest of the oncoming aircraft. The other tool at your disposal is your AIM-9Ls. You might have noticed I'm once again running a very cursed asymmetric loadout of 5 Sparrows and 4 Sidewinders because I do quite often find myself using a lot of AIM-9s. When fired down on targets below you, the AIM-9Ls can score kills from as far away as 4 kilometers in some cases, and have reasonably good rear aspect flare resistance, which is very useful against the very high thrust, very hot enemies you face at this BR. Paired with the fact that a lot of enemies are just not going to be looking up above them, and many will be relying on their RWR to tell them when a missile is approaching, these work very well for cleaning up those mid-map furballs I mentioned earlier. Obviously, things aren't always going to go to plan though, so I'd like to show you an example of actually winning a BVR engagement against a superior enemy, in this case an F-15C firing AMRAAMs. Once I notice I'm being fired on, I'm going to gradually start turning away so as to keep my speed up and not bleed all my energy. This is going to bleed the missile of a lot of speed while keeping me fast enough to re-engage the launching aircraft. I'm also popping chaff before each time I turn, since I'm not exactly sure what direction the missile is coming from, but in any case, you need to be changing direction while popping chaff and notching, since these missiles were buffed a few months ago and will now be much more difficult to fool if you continue to try flying in a straight line. As you'll see in just a sec, this guy appears to have missed the memo on that fact, and he's going to pay for it. Anyways, I'm able to re-engage at relatively high speed, considering I just turned 270 degrees, and fire off a Sparrow at 10 kilometers, which is basically point blank. What this guy should have done is had another missile queued up for when I turned hot towards him again, but as you can see, having better understanding of your weapons and radar is still the most important factor, even if you're engaging a superior opponent. So is the Hornet useless? No, definitely not. Is it a huge bummer that it missed out on its chance to be top dog for a while? Yes, absolutely. Unfortunately, even when played carefully, the Hornet is just outright inferior in terms of weaponry and flight performance to many of the enemies that it will commonly encounter. However, it has decent missiles and carries a lot of them, it turns very well, and if played by a skilled pilot, it can definitely rack up some high kill games regardless. And in the case of the premium version, it will definitely burn you through the American tech tree very quickly. Before I wrap up, just 2 quick pieces of channel news. First, the Squadron is now open, so if you've been wanting to get some Squadron vehicles for free, here's your opportunity. All members of my Discord are eligible to join, however, paid channel members will get to keep a reserved slot in the event that it fills up, and we have to start rotating inactive members. Speaking of channel memberships, that's also open, and on top of some other perks such as shoutouts and early access to my videos, silver level and above will be getting to choose some of what videos and subjects I cover in my videos going forward, so if that's something that interests you, check that out below. Anyways guys, that's going to be it for this one. If you enjoyed this content, don't forget to like, comment, and subscribe. Check out the playlist in the description for more ARB videos, and I'll see you guys in the next one.